Hey, this is Seth Parnell, the minister of the Portia Church of Christ, and this is episode 152 of the Midweek Bible Study. Hope that you are doing well. Hope that things are going your way. We appreciate you stopping by and being here, joining us for the study, and we hope this does you some good. Hope it's beneficial, to you. Been a pretty nice day here in Jonesboro. Pretty a good, just kind of an average day. Weather-wise, it's pretty good, and so hope that if you got out and did some things, hope you had a good time at it. Had a productive day, hopefully. We always want to give you an invitation. If you're someone who is in the Portia area, feel free to drop by and see us. We would love to talk to you. We'd love to worship with you. We'd love to see you, and it's always a good thing in order to meet your fellow Christians. We are located at 307 South Jackson Street in Portia, Arkansas, and right now we are meeting at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, 5 o'clock on Sunday night, and 6 o'clock on Wednesday night. I hope you can join us then. We just finished a study on the book of Matthew, and we studied all throughout the Gospel of Matthew, chapter by chapter, and got to finished chapter 28 last night. And so we're going to start in on the book of Acts, I believe, in the coming future. And so that's what we'll be studying if you drop by on Wednesday night. And we have another class on Sunday as well. I believe we're studying some of the Old Testament. We're studying a little bit about David and such. And so hopefully you can join us. That if you're in the area, you're always welcome. Also know that if you ever have any questions or comments about what we studied tonight, please feel free to send that our way. We would love to hear from you. Love to have you participate in our study tonight. It's good to have Ted Knight with us. Hope that you are doing well. Always appreciate you being here. Hope you've had a wonderful day today. We always appreciate you guys being here. But tonight we're going to take a look at Colossians chapter 1. Colossians chapter 1. It's going to be as per usual, with our solo episodes. It'll be a little bit shorter than usual. But next week we are going to have a guest. We're going to have a longer episode next week. But I believe Zach Flynn's going to be with us next week, and so I know you're going to enjoy what he has to say. But tonight we're taking a look at Colossians chapter 1 and taking a look at the deity of Christ, or what is sometimes referred to as the preeminence of Christ. At least that's how the sections in the Bible that in the ESV refers to it as the preeminence of Christ. And Paul, of course, who wrote the book of Colossians, or really was a letter to a group of churches in that region, to the region of Colossae. And he wrote to them about a number of different things, as his letters usually did. You read through Ephesians, you read through Corinthians. It usually covers a multitude of topics, that are that were relevant, to the church, or relevant, to the congregation. Sometimes it was correction that needed to be happened. Sometimes it was, a celebration of things that they were doing right. But usually there was a number of things that Paul had to address. And so he's going to start out Colossians with a pretty good little section here in describing just who Jesus is, which is an interesting question. When you go boil it down to the basics, which a lot of times it's a good thing to go back to the very basic things, in the scriptures. If you ask the question, who is Jesus? That's a simple question. That's if you wrote that out in a sentence, it's not going to be very long. But the answer to that is a little bit deeper, a little bit more. Who is, Jesus? I imagine you'd get a number of different answers if you ask different people, as is usually the case with these questions. But who is Jesus is a question that I believe is too big to cover in one study session. But we could talk a long time about the fact that about this question, about diving deep into it. What is Jesus about? What describes him? What it makes up who Jesus is? What is he what best describes the characteristics, the qualities that he had, the purpose that he had here on this earth. And so that could take a while in order to dive deep into. We're going to focus on one particular thing here tonight and look at the divine nature of Jesus, the deity of Christ, as Paul's going to go on to describe here in Colossians chapter 1. It's good to see Nancy here. Hope that you are doing well. Always appreciate you watching and being here with us tonight as well. Hope you've had a good day. But here in Colossians chapter 1, we're going to start in verse 15 and see what Paul has to say. It says, "He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. Whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church, and he is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross." And so Paul goes through this section and talking about a small answer to this question of who is Jesus. He, in verse 15, he starts out by saying he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. That's the first verse that he starts out this section with, the image of the invisible God. You think about what an image is and what an image was in reference to the Greek language. An image, think about like a coin. You have a coin, and there is an image that is imprinted on that coin, usually of a president in our country. You see the picture of that president on that coin, and that is that gives that image. It gives that resemblance, that mark on that coin. It says he is the image of the invisible God. We can't, with God, as far as God is concerned, we can't go out and touch him. We can't see him with our physical eyes. We can't hear him. We can't do all those things that we do with other people, because he describes him as the invisible God, which is an interesting quote, because image of the invisible kind of seems like it's a little contrasting, kind of seems like it's a little different with each other. But he says the image of the invisible God. Jesus is he is part of that Trinity. He is part of God, the three in one. He says he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. And this is a verse that you need to don't read over too fast, because it's easy to draw a different conclusion than I think what Paul is trying to get across here. If you read through this too fast and go down throughout the end of the chapter, because he says he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. Now, does this mean that during creation, God created Jesus, and that that Jesus was the first thing that God created, and then he then he created the earth, and he created the sun and the moon and the animals, and created Adam and Eve? Is that what took place in the book of Genesis? Well, not exactly, because this term, the firstborn of all creation, doesn't mean that Jesus was created as part of the creation process, but that he was above all else. He is above all of creation. There is nothing in this created world that can be equal to Jesus, that can stand toe to toe, shoulder to shoulder with Jesus. But the firstborn is a term that is sometimes used to mean the first, or the top, or one above all, because in the family situation, especially you read this in the Old Testament, a lot of times the firstborn would be the one who was kind of given the extra material inheritance. He was given the responsibility of carrying on the family name. There's a lot of responsibility and a lot of extra stuff that went with being a firstborn. And so if you were the firstborn, and then there was child number 6 down at the bottom, you had to listen to what the firstborn said, because they had that authority. You weren't you were still part of the family, but you weren't equal in that sense. And so Jesus was not created in this sense, but he is above all creation. And he is part of God. He is above all creation. And there's some groups out there, and throughout history there's been a lot of groups that have disagreed with this, that have said this is not true, that they have a hard time wrapping their mind around who God is and who Jesus is, and their relationship with each other. Because we find this here in the next verse, in talking about this idea of was Jesus created, where he says, "For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him." And so we find here Paul explicitly states Christ wasn't created, but he was part of that creation process, and the fact that he was there when God created the earth. He was there when God put everything into existence, created the physical laws that bind our earth together. Jesus was there. He was a part of that, and he was able to experience that. You'll go look at John chapter 1, and look at where he says, "In the beginning was the Word." See what John has to say concerning what Jesus was, how Jesus was around during the part of creation. And this is really a grand, kind of a grand verse to think about here in verse 16, where he says, by him all things were created, whether it be in heaven or on earth, whether it be visible or invisible, whether thrones, dominions, rulers, authorities, all things were created through him and for him. That's a lot. There's encompassing everything that we know in existence, but yet he was a part of that. He was a part of what that held together. And so the part of Jesus that we see throughout the Gospels, we know that he was indeed fully human. He was also fully God as well. And continue on in verse 17, it says, "And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together." Saying this, and reinforcing this idea all the more, because there was a teaching at this time. Excuse me. There was a teaching at this time that that taught that Jesus wasn't really the Son of God, or wasn't really either that there was kind of multiple branches that were kind of deviating from the truth of the gospel. There was, of course, a group of teachings called Gnosticism, in which a branch of Gnosticism believed that Jesus was either fully human, or was fully God, but he could not be both. Either he was God as far as the spirit, and he didn't have a human body, as we will see later on that wasn't the case. But either that, or that he was fully human and he wasn't part of God. They had a hard time reconciling the two, which, as we know, it can be a pretty deep subject to dive into. But they began teaching that that Jesus wasn't God, that he didn't have that as part of him. But Paul's going to address this here with this statement here, and talking about the preeminence of Christ. And in verse 18, he says all things, basically saying all creation is under Jesus, and also he says he is the head of the body, and which is the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, and that in everything he might be preeminent. And so Not only was it part of creation that Jesus had a hand in, but he says he's also the head of the church, and he is the one that stands as that mediator. He's the one that is at the top, has the authority over the church. And so that's why whenever we decide, what we do as a church and as congregations, we always want to look at the scriptures to see what the Bible has to tell us. We don't want to go off of, any opinions that have been written. Even doesn't matter how smart a person is, how educated a person is. Doesn't matter how many good ideas he has. We don't want to go off of anything but the words of Jesus and what he has to tell us, because he is the head of the church. It's not the preacher, it's not the elder, it's not any person in the congregation, but Jesus, is the head of the church. And so, as far as someone joining a church, somebody joining a congregation, it's not up to me. It's not. Excuse me. It's not really up to you. But if someone believes and they obey and they take action on what Jesus, and then the New Testament writers have, given us, being baptized for the remission of your sins, that's between you and God. And we wish that everyone would come to know the truth and have their sins washed away. But as we know, Jesus will say that the way to destruction is broad. There's going to be many who follow it. But Jesus is the head of the church. He's the beginning. He's the firstborn from the dead. There's that word. He uses the word firstborn again here as well, and that in everything he might be preeminent. And so Paul's really hammering this home. And there's some thought that this section here, I believe it's verses 15 down to verse 20. Some believe that this was part of a song that was sung, way back when, and like in the very early parts of the church, and that Paul is kind of quoting this, but we don't know, for sure. But he's definitely driving this point home. For in verse 19 it says, "For in him all the fullness of God was pleased, to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on heaven, or whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of the cross." And so how do we have, peace, through him? How do we get, peace through the blood of the cross? You think about that statement, because was there anything peaceful, about a cross? Was there anything peaceful about, the process of crucifixion? It was a gruesome, cruel process, and the blood that was shed during that process was immense. But yet he says that there is peace, by the blood of his cross. We can have peace, with God. We can have peace because we can get a freedom from sin if we allow the blood of Jesus to take its effect. You can try any number of things. You can try, a multitude of different things to give you peace. But as far as having peace with God, there's only one thing that's going to do that, and that is, through the blood of Jesus. Because it says, in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. Jesus is not half God. He's not, part of God. But it says all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell there in verse 19. And so what does this mean for us? The fact that Jesus, was fully God. What does this mean, for us, as people? Well, it means that he has, the authority, and he has, the power, that he claims, to have. And there's other cases in which we can look at. I mean, we're just looking at Colossians here, but there's many other verses that we could tie into to support the fact that Jesus, was indeed, it had that divine nature about him. But it means that he has the authority and the power to make a difference, to be someone who actually makes actual change in our life as far as our spiritual life is concerned. Because if Jesus was just a guy, if he was just a very spiritual, well-meaning person, but not God, then he wouldn't have the authority. He wouldn't have the power in order to make a real change, in my life or in your life. But the fact that Jesus is, God, the fact that he has that authority, that means that he has the ability to take away our sins. He has the ability to give us hope, to give us a path, to salvation. And so we know that he is the one, that has the way, to life. As the apostles would say, there is no other name under heaven given among men in which man you may be saved. Jesus is the only way, because he is the only one who has the power and authority, to make that happen. It also means that Jesus is our mediator. He's the one in which we go through in order to have that salvation, in order to pray to someone who takes our situation, and presents it before the Father. There's other groups, out there who pray to either angels, or sometimes they pray, to Mary. But out of all those, there's no one who has, the authority, the divine nature that Jesus does, and that, gives him, the ability to be that mediator, so that we can, know that is helping us in that manner. And so it's an important thing to look at the fact that Jesus, this is part of who Jesus is. And we could take a look at another time. We'll take a look at the human side of Jesus, the fact that he experienced, all the trials that we go through and what that means, for us. He experienced pain. He experienced, emotional pain. He went through a lot, during his short time here on this earth. But it's not something, that you tackle lightly. But I think, Paul wanted to make sure, and right off the bat in this letter to the Colossians, that they understood that the nature of Jesus, the answer to this question, or part of the answer to this question of who is Jesus, is that he was, fully God. That for in him all the fullness of God was pleased, to dwell. And so I hope that's something, that helps us out, when we ask this question, for ourselves. It's good. It's a good question, to ask, yourself. Even if you've been someone, who has been a Christian for years, even if you've, studied the Bible, front and back, and you know a lot. Ask yourself, these questions. Ask yourself, who is, Jesus, and then write out your response, or think about how you would answer if somebody asked you that question. Then, if somebody does ask you that question, if somebody is interested in being a Christian, you know exactly what to say. You know exactly how to present that to them, and they can know the goodness of God as well. But I believe that's all we got here for tonight. We appreciate everyone being here tonight and stopping by and helping us, study the Word of God. As I said, we'll be back here next week at 7 o'clock, Thursday night, as we always do. We'll have a guest. Zach Flynn will be with us, and so he's going to be. We're going to be studying, I believe, Acts chapter 8. We're going to take a look at the Ethiopian eunuch. And so I know you're going to enjoy what he has to say, and we'll have a good study then. But until then, I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day and a good week. And I hope you go out and glorify God in everything that you do. Catch you next time.